is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today I'm joined by a strength and conditioning coach. He's the founder of Garage Strength. Today I'm joined by the one and only Dane Miller. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
So how are you, Dane? What's been happening in your world recently?
I'm doing well. I think the what's happening right now in my world is just dealing with track and field season or athletics is starting to really build up here in the States and trying to plan how people are going to be qualifying for Paris and at the same time try to run the business and film YouTube videos all sort of conjoining each other. So dealing with the emotional aspects of the athletes while also trying to manage my schedule and be a good father and spouse to my wife as well.
Yeah, nice. How do you kind of divide your time between, obviously you mentioned there like the putting the content out there, the coaching and then family time. Is that something that you're always working on in terms of dividing your time up? That I like to ask that question because I know for me, especially as my roles changed and things happening at home and those sorts of things, trying to wear the different hats at different times and switch off from certain jobs. How do you kind of find dividing your time?
I think for me it's that's always been like a struggle, but I think I try to sort of chunk everything into like specific times that I'm going to be coaching, specific times that we're filming, and we have a fairly routine schedule as far as filming, and like when we write scripts and what we're trying to do with the content on YouTube. So then it's like, okay, I know I'm coaching at these times. I know I'm actually, filming at these times. I know I have to analyze schedule and peaking athletes on at these specific times. And then I know like specific days that I might try to leave earlier, to spend time with my kids and pick them up from school or something. So I think for me, it's like an ongoing battle, but it's I've gotten quite a bit better at it. And my wife has always been supportive. She works with us too, so it's like we're all sort of on the same page. And I think that it's just it's never going to be an easy thing to figure out. But I think the hardest thing for me has always been when we change seasons or when we're changing. So we've got we have three guys that train for pro days from the NFL. One of their pro days was 2 weeks ago. Two of the guys have a pro day on Monday, and then that's like a shift in the season to really, really more work with the track athletes, like meaning specific work as travel and stuff like that. So it's like when those transitions happen, that's usually when I have the biggest struggle, really. And I think it's just being aware of that, honestly.
Yeah, I like to ask that. I like to ask that question just to see, I try and time block out my day and make sure that you're divided on that. And I always like to ask just to see whether maybe I can pick up some tips in terms of, trying to manage time. Um, I did quite a brief introduction there, but I know, you mentioned just before we started recording about, coaching some athletes today, mentioned about, the NFL athletes as well. For everyone listening who might not know your background in coaching, your career so far, if you like, getting to the point where you're at now, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Yeah, so I was an athlete. I was a shot putter, wrestler, football player in high school, American football, and then I ended up being a shot putter in college at Penn State, which is like a Power Five Division I level. Uh, Spotty career, like never all American, which would be like the one of the highest things that you could do at the Division I level, but decent. And then I ended up training with a coach named Anatoly Bondarchuk. And when I was training with him, people started to get interested in what we were doing in training. And then that was 2008. And basically, I realized at that point, like, oh, people were interested in my training thoughts. And I was always fortunate enough that I had a high school gym teacher who was really interested in strength training. My dad was always interested in strength training, and he would let us buy magazines off like the magazine shelf at the grocery store back in the day. So it's like I always had this interest in it. 2005 when I was in college, YouTube started, and I noticed that you could post like training videos and stuff like that. Um, I want to say by 2008, I think I had posted my first YouTube video, but I didn't stick with it. And then, and I just focused on, I continued to throw and train till I was right around like 29 or 30. And then I started to get more and more focused on coaching the athletes, and it was like, I've always known I wanted to coach athletes to get to the NFL, or to coach athletes to get to the Olympics, or coach athletes to get to world championships. And it all sort of started here in the States. It's like if you have especially in Pennsylvania, if you have athletes win like a state title or anything like that, or become an All-American, it can help you as a coach, and it helps you become, obviously you get better as a coach as you have more of those experiences. um and that's always been the sort of the root of my motivation, is like, I want to be the best coach in the world. I want to be the best possible coach. I want to get as many athletes to the Olympics, get as many athletes to the world championships, to the NFL, and things like that. And um here I am. I guess we really started to go hard on the channel on YouTube in 2020 during COVID. um and it was all sort of like, 16, I had an athlete in Rio. I've been to every world championship since 2016 for track and field, and I've been to every senior world championships for weightlifting since 2015, 26, 17. And I've had world bronze medalist 2 times in freestyle wrestling. I've had athletes at world championships for sprint cycling, for swimming. And so it's sort of like been this all-encompassing bunch of different sports, bunch of different athletes, a bunch of different lessons. And then how can we develop a system that we can sort of put out to the world through YouTube, essentially, and then through our app as well.
Yeah, nice. And with that, obviously, you mentioned there starting off as an athlete, and I know for myself, playing rugby and competing in powerlifting, there's sometimes maybe a shift between. So now I've actually taken more clients and athletes to competitions than I probably competed myself.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
that point, how did you kind of feel adjusting from being athlete and focusing on your training to then being a coach and going kind of all in with the athletes that you're training?
That's a good question. I think for me, you know, we had early on, while I was still throwing, I had high school kids like going to states and medaling at states and then winning states while I was still competing. Um, I think maybe it might have helped having athletes in sports that I wasn't competing in, and then that sort of helped the transition. I also think I just started to recognize that I I saw the end for me, and I saw the lack of, I wasn't going to win an Olympic title. I wasn't going to do anything wild like that. Not that I think that you have to, like, every athlete that should be their end goal. I mean, maybe to a point it could be, but for me, it was like, I started to get more excited about helping other people.
Yeah,
Um, and I started to experience that joy and happiness around, very early on, actually. I had a girl who came, and this is going back to like 2009, 2010. I had a girl who came in who, she was throwing around 10 meters in the shot, um, maybe even a little bit less. And then by the following year, so within about 12 months, she was throwing 12 and a half to 13 meters, and ended up going from like being just this non-existent athlete to making it to states, getting second at states, getting a full ride to go throw in college. And that experience that early, I was like, wow, that, like, I had a pretty big impact on her, and her work ethic basically completely changed the direction of her life.
yeah,
And I think that helped quite a bit with that transition, where it's like, you get a kid who comes in, and they might not go to college, they might not have money, and in her case, her father was in jail at the time, and it's like, dude, she just went to school for free. Like, she just
yeah,
won literally just because she trained hard for a year. And I think that's like where I started to realize, like, it's not, yeah, throwing far and screaming and losing your mind and doing things like that. It's great, but also having a really positive impact on people long term is more beneficial, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can sit back and think, wow, that's cool. Look how much of an impact you had. I know.
Yeah.
I was actually away over the weekend, and I had an athlete compete, and it's one of the few occasions that I couldn't get to the competition, but I could watch the live stream. So I was watching it, and I was getting more excited than I think
Yeah.
I would have done. Thinking back to myself competing. Yes, you get excited and you have that adrenaline, but I felt the exact same. She was going into the final deadlift, which would have been, especially at a lower weight class, would have been the biggest all-time PB that she'd pulled, and I felt as though I was there with her, trying to pull that. So experiences like that is makes it that you want to keep coaching and go all in on that. Don't get me wrong, I would still like to do a couple of competitions, but yeah, when you see the impact that that has and how excited the athlete or client gets, you kind of want you want more hits of that to be able to
Yeah,
do
yeah,
it.
exactly.
Yeah. You couple of sports that you've mentioned there, especially with the throwing and the more athletic sports. One thing or the main topic that I wanted to dive into is explosive strength, and there's a I think a lot of people have ideas of what that is. But I just wanted to hear your thoughts or your take on what explosive strength is and why is that important? Because everyone, wants to get stronger, put more weight on the bar. But when you're
Hmm.
looking at, the throwing events, it's okay to be strong, but you need to be able to use that strength. What's been your thought process on that?
That's going to be a hard one or a long one possibly. Is like I think the downfall of the sports world is that we've sort of been taught like I think there's like a big misconception where okay, you think about strength, right? And you think about you either think about this big monstrous bodybuilder or a big monstrous power lifter, but you're not thinking about Usain Bolt. Okay, you're not thinking about Barry Sanders. You're not thinking about Michael Jordan. Okay, so we have this term of strength that is all encompassing, and that's like the predetermined maybe pop and interpretation of strength. And then you have okay, well, if I want to add muscle, immediately people sort of they don't want to look like Ronnie Coleman. They don't want to look like Jay Cutler. Because of those misconceptions, right? Um, and then even so that's strength. Then you bring in like power, and which would be work over a certain time based off of the definition. But people will consider power like powerlifting, which technically you could call it that, but in reality, like it's probably a bad term to represent the sport. Um, and I think that even further, I mean, Olympic weightlifting, it's still not that good of a title. And I think that the so I'm setting this up where it's like there's so many misconceptions just based off of verbiage that we're trying to describe what strength is and what all these factors are. And to go into your discussion, we hear explosive strength, and I think it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? It means somebody who's not educated on these topics. So let's say someone who's just a general viewer, um, they think explosive strength, and they might think someone who can bench fast, or maybe somebody who can squat, but they move fast. And I think that's fair. Um, I think for me, the way when I hear explosive strength, I start to think about time, okay, how in a short time frame, and I start to think about output or force, okay, how much force in a time frame. And then I start to identify like, okay, if we can have this time continue or this time restriction and we can have force restriction, it very likely would mean a large amount of force in a short period of time. Okay, so that could be, and it should be a large amount of force in a short period of time relative to load. Okay, so then I start to think about load relative to velocity. If somebody can move, going even deeper, then that's when I start to think about explosive strength. Is like, okay, um, it should be, and that term, actually, I'll just go into this. That term, force and time, is impulse. So we should be calling explosive strength should be termed as impulse-based training. Okay, so impulse is force over time, or force times time. Now, how is that represented? That to me should be represented based off of, um, okay, so impulse is a major factor in running fast. If, Usain Bolt, and every time that he would put his foot down at top speed, was exhibiting like 5 times his body weight. That's a ungodly amount of force. That's an ungodly amount of strength. If you're maxing out your back squat at like 90% of load of your PR, let's say you're probably going to be exhibiting 3.5 to 4 times your body weight into the ground. That's a massive amount of strength in a pretty short time frame. And so I think explosive strength to me would then be represented by faster movements with load and fast movements without load. So we like to look at it as, okay, a vertical jump is explosive strength. And now we would term that impulse-based representation. So a vertical jump, a broad jump, a power clean, a full clean, a snatch, a behind the neck jerk, a push press. Um, I think to a point you could even argue that something like an unbroken back squat or something like that done rapidly could be a representation of explosive strength. But I try to look at explosive strength through the terminology of impulse-based training, and then I try to tie, like, okay, if I need somebody to get stronger, or if I need somebody to get more explosive with their strength based off of the like general terminology, I'm going to analyze what's their vertical jump, what's their broad jump, what's their, power clean or power snatch or whatever, they're comfortable doing in that test situation. With throwers, what's their behind the neck jerk, and then analyzing that with specific ratios and saying, like, okay, here, this individual has this leak in their explosive strength and their impulse-based training, so we need to increase it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think there's like a discussion that we need in the strength world around terminology and really clarifying it and using the right terms. Now, that's also like taking on a huge institution, I guess, of terms. But I think that explosive strength is a very good general term that could then, in my mind, gets defined in my training system as impulse.
Yeah, I think with that, what I quite liked is the whole explanation of there actually mentioning, actually how we describe things like powerlifting. I've competed in powerlifting. They're not necessarily the most powerful movements, especially if someone's grinding out a deadlift. It's going to be quite slow building that up, but actually. What I liked what you said there is breaking it down into categories of what that will be. And when we're looking at the different types of sports, would that be, when we're looking at that general term of explosive strength, would that be, the same exercises that you're using depending on what that athlete feels comfortable with, the same battery of exercises, or depending on the sport that the athlete is playing, would that be, would there be different explosive strength demands, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that we should actually discuss, maybe we don't need to do this right now, but I
Yeah.
think that the strength world does actually need to discuss what's the different definition of power in like physics terminology or biomechanics. Because if we use the term power properly, powerlifting might actually be a good term. Because like if you're hitting a back squat for a long period and you're doing a shitload of work, I don't know, it might be the right term, but we think of power as like what I think impulse should be. So I think that's where my confusion of all this, that I just wanted to like bring that up, because
Yeah.
I used to think that powerlifting is a bad name, but now I start to think maybe it's actually a good name and we're just using the words the wrong way. Um, that's a whole aside. Now, to answer the real question of like explosive strength movements. So what we try to do, and sort of what we've done in our system is like, um, we term all these things as like a sport depth. Okay, so if we would look at sport depth one is going to be like, let's say a shot putter or a weightlifter, someone who is doing a very rapid action in a very short period of time. Okay, so that would be, they have minimal amounts of endurance components. Maybe the largest amount of endurance component that a shot putter would have is like strength endurance or specific endurance to like taking as many throws as they can in a session. So like let's say 30 to 40 throws. The only endurance component that they're really going to need to be better throwers is to just be able to handle more volume in the throw or more volume in the weight room. Um, so their impulse or explosive strength work is going to be pretty substantial. And then I come into, okay, so we have all these sport depths laid out in our system, right? And then we go sport depth two would be like, let's say a running back or probably not rugby sevens, but traditional like full team. What is it, 15, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that to me would be like sport depth two, where there's a bit more endurance work, but there's still quite a bit of interval training, or there's quite a bit of intervals in the actual sport. So like a running back will run quite a bit, and there's locomotion involved, um, but there's still a fair amount of breaks as well. So they're going to be doing a little bit less impulse work or less explosive strength work than sport depth one, but they're still going to be doing a relatively close percentage because the endurance component, you know, let's say it's 5% for a shot putter, it's probably going to be about 15% for the rugby player, for the running back in the United States, right? Then sport depth three would be now, and I call this the keystone depth, where it's like this would be like combat sports. So now you're seeing there's less locomotion. They have to be explosive. They have to be strong in the sense of like moving heavy freaking weight because they have an opponent as their object, but they also have to have a large amount of conditioning. So now we might pull out some explosive strength because we know that if they have better cardio, if like 25% of their training is doing some type of cardio. And we also use specific sport time versus supplemental time. So they're training in the weight room. We have ratios that we use for all these depths. We know that wrestlers will train upwards of 12 hours, maybe even more in the actual wrestling room. And then they might be doing supplemental work for another potentially 5 to 7 hours a week. About 25% of that will be endurance work, and about 20% of that will still be explosive strength, or explosive strength based off of how you pose the question. So that would be a little bit different, but the exercises will still be pretty freaking similar. Okay, so we'll set up the test so that this wrestler is still going to do a lot of the same types of explosive movements, but the relative percentage in their overall training will be lower versus the shot putter. And then I'll even do that, and I would even lump in plyometrics and stuff like that into that explosive work. Then sport depth four, and we have five. Sport depth four would be a lacrosse player, maybe rugby sevens. We refer to it as soccer. You guys call it football, and that's bad terminology on our part. So football in the real sense, likely basketball as well would be in there. Tennis probably would possibly be in there. And then those athletes they still have to be freaking explosive. They still have to be explosive, but they're also running like 5 to 7 miles a game, like if it's a full length game. So we've got to be aware of like, okay, how can we build up, let's just say theoretically, a 5K time as a test, but then also they can have, a 30-inch vertical so that they still are explosive. So they'll have a little bit less explosive strength work, but they'll still have enough that they're twitchy and they're not somebody who would then be like a sport depth five, which would be like a marathoner, a 10K runner, where almost all of their sport is endurance based. And those athletes might only have, around 10 to 12% of their training is doing explosive work, because they still will benefit from, a 10K runner will still benefit from doing plyometrics or from doing cleans or from doing single leg squats. We know that those types of explosive strength movements can improve their locomotion, can improve their gait, their running gait, but we can't train them so much that it negates their actual mileage that they're trying to get in, or the percentage of like zone 2 versus zone 5 training that they're doing. So it's like, if you look at the broad spectrum of training a shot putter all the way to a marathoner, it would be, they're going to use pretty freaking similar exercises, like a hang power clean or a hang snatch, or I even think to a point you could argue that like a dynamic deadlift or something that, maybe it's banded or something along those lines could fall into this explosive strength spectrum. Those exercises would be pretty freaking similar, but it's the way it's periodized and the quantity of time in their supplemental training that is going to be the differentiator.
Yeah. And
Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. Well, because I think, I always like to, how my brain kind of works, and what you were saying there in terms of, the categorizing the different sports. How my brain works is like in a flow chart. So it's like, right, okay, well, this is what we're going to aim for. And then that way there's a system to work to, rather than just trying to throw everything out there. Because then that way, for example, the marathon runner, all right, okay, cool. So we know, what we're going to be using for that athlete, as opposed to somewhat like a combat athlete, or anything like that. And one thing that you said there is, percentage wise, this is how much you're going to divide up their training.
Mm-hmm.
How have you kind of refined that system, and made sure that everything is fit into that program, so that they're not, because sometimes, like what we said at the start about just general strength, we can get athletes stronger, but at some
Mm-hmm.
point they need to be able to use that strength, because if it's somebody playing, American football, for example, and they've got really good static strength, but they can't move around the field, around the pitch. It's kind of, it's becoming then
Worthless.
detrimental to their performance. So how do you make sure that everything is fit into that program, and there's, yeah, maybe the right word is balance, to make sure that there's that balance there, so that areas aren't getting neglected, because when it comes to that all-round performance, ultimately it's, how do they perform at their given task or sport, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's I think that's like, arguably that would to me be the best question in strength and conditioning, or in the training of sports performance. I think what you just posed is what everyone needs to be thinking about when they're trying to solve problems for their athletes, and when they're trying to make them the best athlete possible for that individual. Um, so going off of that sport depth scenario, depth 1 through 5, the first thing that I like to do then is say, okay, there's specific sports under each depth. So like, let's say you're looking at the depth 5 is that marathon runner, but underneath that, and this is like total endurance level, there might be an 800-meter runner, and then there might be a 5K that you're dealing with, who's a 5K runner. There might be a triathlete that you're dealing with, and those three are going to train differently to a point, because an 800-meter runner does need to be twitchier. It's like essentially a 2-lap sprint. It's a race of like, who's got the biggest balls, let's go. And like, that athlete has to be explosive and fast, and they've got to have a big gas tank too. Now, you look at somebody who is a marathon runner, and it's more of like, okay, the next 2 hours, you're going to suffer. Whoever can suffer the best is going to win. And I think that just in sport depth 5, you can see, okay, there's going to be a little difference where the 800 runner might have a little bit higher percentage of impulse training, a little bit higher percentage of strength work than the marathoner. The marathoner strength work is really just going to be about staying healthy, staying mobile. The 800-meter runner is going to be more about like we got to get you a little bit twitchier. We got to get you a little bit stronger so that when you hit that third, or when you would hit, let's say at this point, yeah, that third 200, the fourth two, the fourth 200, but really it's the third 200 where most of those races are won, from the 600 to the, or from like the 400 to the 600-meter mark. That's usually when most of those races are won. So it's like, how can we pull you away from the pack at that point? So now if we go all the way back to, let's say like the sport depth 3, if we look at sport depth 3, we might have a wrestler and their physical opponent is literally another individual that's pushing and pulling. So they have to have more absolute strength. They have to be like, what we would say is like, they got to be cock strong. Like they've got to freaking be strong. Whereas a boxer is going to have less interplay with their opponent. They're literally just striking, backing, and so they might have more explosive work and they might have more endurance work, but slightly less strength work, because they're not actually, there's, yes, they're still going to be tangling up a little bit, but it's not nearly to the level of an actual wrestler. Like if we're looking at freestyle wrestling or in the US folk style wrestling. So it's taking the depths, mining down a little bit with just the sport specific work. Like, okay, this might be a little bit different here, percentage based off of, and we look at it through when we're initially setting it up, we go impulse, so explosive strength, the way you sort of described it. Okay. Then we're looking at absolute strength work. So that's going to be, what's their best back squat, what's their best bench, what's their best pull up or something like that. Then we're going to look at speed. Is there a component of locomotion? Okay, so then there's, if you're running fast, let's say for football with a pro day guy, they're going to time your 40 or they're going to time your 10-yard sprint. Okay, so we got speed there. And then is there a component of endurance? And then we're going to look at like, okay, is this going to be more high threshold work, or is this going to be more just aerobic threshold work? And then we try and break each thing down based off of those four areas underneath the depths, underneath the sport type. Now, to go further, we go into it and we say, okay, every athlete needs a benchmark. They need benchmarks on these four areas. These are the, let's say, four lifts that represent the four areas. Okay, so if we look at impulse, we're going to test a vertical, test a broad, test a clean, test a behind the neck jerk or something like that, right? Depending upon the sport. If we look at speed, we would test a 10, a 40. We might even test a shuttle, okay, like a 5-10-5. If they're baseball players, they're testing a shuttle, okay. Then if we're looking at back or at strength, we might test a back squat or a front squat or a single leg squat, depending upon the sport, back or a pull up or a bench, right? And then if we're looking at endurance, depending upon the sport, we might test 1,000-meter repeats on the assault bike. We might test a 5K run. We might test a 1 hour threshold on a cycling bike. So we have these benchmarks that we establish, and then we go even further and we say, okay, when a kid's in middle school, when they're in sport depth 2, and they're trying to get to this level, this is the middle school benchmark to become a starter at high school. When you're in high school, you're going to try and train towards the benchmarks that we have internally established to get to be a Power 5, Division 1 athlete, or just to be an NCAA athlete. When you're in college, you're going to train towards benchmarks to become a professional athlete, if that's what if that's where you're at with your training. And so I think the big issue that is lacking is that in the strength world, we focus on a lot of like important measurements, but we don't provide a blueprint that is based off the level you're at, based off of benchmarks that you can work towards. And those benchmarks should really be directly related to making you better at your sport. And your sport should be identified through how much of those four areas, impulse, strength, speed, and endurance, does your sport actually have. And then that should make up your training. And then you just keep doing that and figuring out the athlete. Okay, well, this athlete can back squat, 270 kilos, but they've got a 25-inch vertical. Well, that's trash. They're either really overweight, or we need to increase their impulse work, their explosive strength work, or vice versa, so it's like, it really comes back to, I liked how you described the flow chart. And to me, that flow chart of depth comes down to specific sport, comes down to the level that they are at. And then when the level is identified, they have benchmarks that they build towards for the next level. And like, we've got eighth grade kids that are in here that they know that if they want to play Power Five football, they know that when they're in eighth grade, they need to try to work towards these numbers that past Power Five football players that we have trained have hit. And
Yeah,
it's the same thing in high school, and then it's like, okay, well, these are guys that have been in the NFL. These are the numbers that they hit. So if we can work towards those, we can do the best that we can to make you the best physical representation of yourself. That doesn't mean that you're going to go to the NFL. That doesn't mean that you're going to do all this, because you also still have to have skill to play the freaking sport, but that's not our job. Our job's not the skill. For me, throwing is and weightlifting is because I do coach those, or pro days stuff actually is, I'm a skill coach with that. But as far as like playing football or being a wrestler, that's not my job is not that. My job is the actual physical development of
yeah.
the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Just touching on that, I thought that was a good point that you made at the end there, that strength and conditioning is going to um uh, the physical attributes on the field. Whereas, like, yeah, if you can't, just using rugby as an example, if you can't catch a ball, doesn't matter how strong or fast you
Mhm.
are, you're not going to do that well. Whereas, I think that's something, again, kind of following that tangent, is that trying to balance in there, like what you mentioned about the wrestlers. They'll be practicing their sport, which is important, but you need to factor that into the program, because sometimes, on the flip side of that, there's some athletes that are naturally gifted in terms of strength and speed. They just need to get better at their sport. But by,
Mhm.
like what you said there, right? Does someone actually just need to lose weight to then be able to tap into their physical attributes a little bit more, which is something that you need to think about, and see that athlete in front of you. One thing when you were talking there about using their benchmarks and using those tests, everything is, we're probably in the age of, there's probably too much information out there and getting too much data. Trying to flip it away from coach working with athlete, from either coaches that you've worked with or seen. I know for myself, seeing younger coaches and trainers coming up, do you think sometimes that's where um, the programming or the service to the athlete, that they get all this information but then just don't know how to either use that information or act on it and implement it to be able to put those programs together and improve the athlete?
Yeah, because I think the way you described the flow chart, right? Like you had said how you think through the flow chart of training, and then I tried to provide the snapshot of our flow chart on our training. And I think that if you don't have that established, and if you don't understand that, and if you don't have the experience, look, listen, dude, everything that we do is like with like a vertical jump touch point or like a vertical jump mat. Like we've played around with velocity based training for over a year, and I've had a world bronze medalist in weightlifting, and it had zero impact on her. Like it was just collecting data. It was not ever, I was never using it as a tool to fuel what we should be doing in training next. And I think that for me, it's always been now, and at the same time, I'm not going to say that that information is bad. It's good. It's good to gather that if you have the flow chart fully laid out and you know where you can piece all the information in. I think it's important. And I think that oftentimes coaches get lost in the data, and then they actually lack development because they don't spend time in the gym. They spend time in the lab, and they're in behind a computer and they're running all these spreadsheets, and it's like they can't relate to kids. Dude, you could have a program that is literally a freaking a jump, a squat, and a one leg accessory. And if you do a program exactly like that for upper body and lower body 4 days a week, and you can get that kid to come in the gym 4 days a week for 4 freaking years, for 4 years straight, when they're in eighth grade till their senior year of high school, that's going to be more effective than getting them, timing them with speed gates. And dude, I will say we just got speed gates, and they are fun to play
Yeah.
around with. But I didn't need any of that stuff to get a guy to become a true freshman starting running back at Penn State and rush for over 1,000 yards and have almost 20 touchdowns. We never touched any of that shit with him. And it's like, I think it's important to build a system first with these the comprehensive flow chart laid out and fill it in. And then when you get the data and you get the information, you know how to piece it all together and you know where it goes and you know where it belongs and you know how you can tweak it. And then you can start to see like real specific things, but it still will not replace like, how do you motivate a kid who's in
Yes.
7th grade to get him to understand that he needs to train 4 to 5 days a week for the next 5 years and then it'll pay off? Like, how do you do that? Tell me, because like that's more important than all the measurements. Forget what you had asked me
Yeah.
before I.
No, no, I think that I did say there might be a few tangents in there, but I think you kind of hit the nail on the head that, for me, there's loads of gadgets out there for everything, even for recovery. I think there's, I'm not sure if you have it over in the US, but the Whoop bands,
Yeah,
which you can
yeah,
wear,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. There's Fitbits, Apple Watches.
yeah.
It's all information, but actually, it's a case of like, right, you still have to do something to be able to
Right.
get those numbers. And sometimes, the speed gates or anything like that, sometimes it's nice to see, oh, yeah, they have got faster. Okay, those speed gates tell me that they've got faster.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right. And I think it's funny because I've the last like year and a half gotten into distance running. And I just recently, dude, you would make fun of me. I have a Garmin here. I was still wearing my Apple Watch. I'll run with a heart rate monitor, and I'm like, damn, how did the people like, dude? There was a dude, a distance runner from I mean, now I guess it's Czechia. Um, this dude, Adam, I think it's Emil Adamek. Emil something. I can't remember his exact
Yeah.
name, but this dude won the Olympics and the marathon, the 10K, and the 5K. He's the only distance runner to ever do that. He didn't have a single freaking gadget, and he was running like a 2:15 or 2:20 in the marathon, and then he's going out and running, a 5K. I think at like a 3:40 if I remember, which is freaking fast, dude. Like people don't like he didn't have that shit, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that I think that um I think it comes back to, and I think this is one goal for myself is like, and I say this, we have an app. Like our app is literally built off of what I had laid out. And I think what I'm trying to do now is take peak strength and say, okay, I have all these things. And this system is literally built off of like how to train in your freaking garage, how to train, with minimal amount of investment in all this other technology. And then I'm trying to get to the point now where I can further take vertical jump feedback or speed feedback, or even, I see people play with force plates, and it's like I've been around force plates. I've played with them quite a bit. How are they actually using them to be effective? And my whole thing is like, if I play around with force plates, I want to figure out how I can play around with force plates so that I can make my actual programming as effective as possible. And I'm using, as you described it, the speed gates telling me that they got faster. They got faster because of the program. They didn't get faster because they have a speed gate. The athlete's going to get more explosive and they're going to display more force in a shorter time frame because of the program, not because of the force plate. So in my goal as a strength coach and as sports performance and as a content creator on YouTube and also to try and make money from the app is like I want our system to be represented with these flow charts, and then I can show with the force plates, with the speed gates, with the vertical jump testing, whatever it might be, this program works. You don't need all this other stuff. It's still cool. The velocity based training, it's still fun. It's still cool. But you don't have to have all that, I guess, is I think one of the big goals I have.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think for, the coaches, and, maybe even from an athlete's point of view, like what we said there, because there is, a lot of gyms, a lot of facilities now are having things that you put on bars for velocity-based training, the force plates, all the apps and all those sorts of things that you can use for recovery or readiness when athletes are coming in. Do you think that, you know maybe newer coaches or younger athletes feel as though that is needed and maybe become dependent on that, as opposed to, we've taken on a new coach at the gym that I'm at, and he's been working for a football team who don't have any facilities. It's literally just like being on a field with a few bands and a little bit of weight. And what I loved in his interview was he had to basically, think outside the box a little bit. How can he get those athletes mobile, ready, powerful with
Hmm.
minimal equipment? Do you think sometimes that athletes and coaches become dependent on that and have lost that art of programming, problem solving, and using what they've got rather than relying on, at the top end where it's gadgets and those sorts of things, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of like a split. Like I think, again, I am not saying these gadgets are bad.
Yeah.
I think they are good, but I think there's I almost relate it to like the Instagram influencer of like you're scrolling, and dude, I'm guilty. I'll scroll and oh shit, that's a good exercise. Like that's pretty neat. Like I hadn't seen that one before. And then I'll try it out and blah blah blah. But I think that the thing there is like I will think about that movement pattern, and then I will think, how can I fit that into my training system? Where would that fit into the sport depths? Where would that fit into the levels? When should I introduce that to an athlete? And I think that there's coaches thinking this way. And then there's coaches that see it, they try it, they'll give it to a sixth grade kid, and it's like, dude, this kid can't even squat yet. Like, yeah, just get him to squat more. Just
Yeah.
get him to like bench more. So um I think it's a little bit of both. I think it does certainly take away from um it does take away from the art and development of coaching, the art of being able to watch somebody back squat. And I think this is the one interesting part with the VBT stuff, like um is that I played around with it a lot, okay? And I could watch someone hit a snatch and know, okay, that was probably like 2 meters per second. Okay, that was probably like 1.93, pretty closely. It's the same way that like if you watch the best triathletes or the best like a 10K runner, right? Like when they're taking their lactate from their ear, they'll take a blood sample and they'll be like, ah, that's probably like 2.1. They actually are usually pretty freaking close to where the measurement is at. And they know their body's using the oxygen well, or not well. In certain instances, they might know the lactate number is 8. If they're running hard. So it's like the it, the warning, I guess, would be like make sure that there is a point of the skill of the coach to understand what a movement looks like and how it might feel to the athlete. The coach should now know how it feels when it looks a certain way, how the athlete feels. And I think that that's all important. And then again, we can go in and possibly use it to like sharpen that skill. If we have access to the technology, we can use that stuff to sharpen the coaching skill, but it should not be everything is relied on that. I think it's just being aware of that. You look at a sport like endurance cycling, and it's essentially like these guys have their coaching skills so dialed in with technology that now they know how long they can pedal at a certain watts per kilo, so that when they get to like 35, 40, 45 minutes left in a race, it's like, okay, we know he can hold 400 plus watts per kilo for the next 40 minutes. Let's go lay the hammer and pull away. And I think that's a really good way to use technology with the coaching skill. And I think everybody's just got to be aware of that as we continuously develop the field. And I think ultimately it does get that way, because I think there's the coaches that rely so much on the tech, they can't develop because they don't know the interpersonal relationship. Like the
Yeah.
feeling how you described watching your athlete hit that last deadlift at a lighter body weight. Like if you lack that emotion, you're not going to be a good coach. Like that's just it. Right. And you have that emotion. And so that emotion and that connection to the development of your athlete is what will get you into technology and out of technology and into technology and out of technology. You're going to use it for what it's good for. because you have that innate like feeling in your I know we use the term, we say cultivate your power, like you're cultivating your power as a coach, like you have that in you and you feel that energy when you
Yeah,
watch your athlete. And like to me that's like a good sign of someone who like is going to be or is a good coach relative to the tech coach who is sort of hands off and doesn't have that connection. I
yeah.
don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the key word that you said there, you mentioned that a couple of times, based off feel, because sometimes, and I'm sure you've seen it with athletes, sometimes they're just in a groove, they're just feeling good in
Yeah, just
terms
let
of
it go.
movement. Yeah, and sometimes, I know we spoke a lot there about systems and following a flow chart and everything, but sometimes you've just got to let them go with it because they've got a good understanding. But from what my perspective is from a coach's point of view, is just there to be on the reins, to be like, look, you're feeling good. Let's not go too far. Whereas, sometimes, you look at not everyone's a machine. So sometimes, I'm a big believer in coaching the person. And if they're struggling, they might have had, lack of sleep, lack of food or whatever. And even though the numbers are saying this is what we're doing today or this is what we're aiming for, it might not work. So yeah, I think feel is a good, and especially when it comes to performance, part of it is feeling good.
Hmm.
One of the athletes that you mentioned was Usain Bolt. I bet when he at a race, you see him, you've seen him when he's before a race, like he looks as though he's feeling good, and he's
He's
ready.
chilling.
He's ready to go.
He's
Absolutely.
dabbing up the guy behind him who's setting up blocks,
Yeah. um, quite a lot
I
of. Sorry, go
what
on.
what one quick thing there. Like, okay, I was thinking about this with okay, so I literally started the gym in my parents' garage, had no money, zero. Okay. And I would almost get this jealous feeling towards coaches that had tech, that had technology. And think about this. You see in the speed world and in the US it's big. Like in the world of sports performance, speed's huge and it's great. And I want one of these. You see a 1080 motion being used, and you're going like, "Damn, dude, they got a 1080 motion. That's sick." And it's the box with the wire, and then you start to think you have to have this, dude. You want to know how many times I bet you Usain Bolt trained on a 1080? Probably zero. Dude was pulling sleds in a dirt field. Like
Yeah.
and if he ever used it, he probably used it like the company was paying him to just run on it. Like he didn't train on a 1080 motion. And this is the fastest human being to ever walk the planet. So it's like, now again, I want a 1080 motion. I'm not saying I won't use it. I want one, but we also have to be aware like it is not mandatory to get to that goal that we want.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is examples of there, using Usain Bolt. Yeah, it is funny when you think, the actual main bulk of his training was, a sled on a dirt track somewhere, and then, it
Hmm.
would be every so often, or that he would use the technology. Quite a lot of topics and tangents covered there, but all I thought really useful information. The last question that I like to ask though, Dane, from everything that we've chatted about there, for coaches listening, athletes listening, what would be your take home points or words of wisdom?
I think the words of wisdom, I guess, or for me, I think the biggest thing that Dr. B Anatoly Bondarchuk said to me, he's like, look, like any system can work, but you've got to have an actual developed system so that you can sort of see things or think things or test things and plug and play. And that comes back to if you have that laid out, it really comes back to learning the number one tool is not technology. The number one tool is not a barbell, a specific bar or a specific band or a specific exercise. The number one tool to learn is the athlete. And if you recognize that early on, that that creates one, the experience and the relationship, but two, it creates this feedback loop that now you're constantly listening and you're hearing, and there might be times that you might hear something and you don't really care what they say, and that's okay. And you might hear something on another day and you really need to hear something, some type of feedback. So I think it's way more important to build and base your system around the athlete experience and how they handle volume at certain periods, how they handle speed work, how they handle intensity, how they recover on a daily basis, and then try to figure out those types of athletes, how those types of athletes fit in. Um, into the system, where they fit into the system, and ultimately that to me is got to be the number one goal, because if we're not focusing on learning from the athlete, then you're never going to set up the peak accordingly. You're never going to get them to perform as well as you need them to. You're never going to achieve the goals. And I think that's the other big thing. It's like you learn from the athlete and you listen to what their goals are, and you try and see how your goals can align with what their goals are, and then ultimately, you've got a good relationship and you got a good system behind it.
Yeah, I think that's a great words of wisdom to finish on. What was going around in my head that you were saying there is, develop that system, but then picking up on, listening, filtering out what is it that you need at that point, rather than, right, this is the plan, and not listening to that athlete, because ultimately they're going to do it. So, again, we mentioned earlier about what information are we actually going to use, and that comes from listening, or picking up on things from there, and building that relationship, which we touched on earlier, which is really important. Thanks a lot, Dane, for taking the time to jump on today. Really, really enjoyed chatting with you today. For everyone listening who might have any questions about what we've chatted about today, see the content or information that you put out there, or reach out to you, where can people find you?
So they could check out our YouTube channels, Garage Strength. We also have another YouTube channel. We actually have too many YouTube channels, but we have another one called Peak Strength. And Peak Strength is sort of like where we break down more of the coaching aspect. The Garage Strength is more like, I would say, like the self-coached athlete, and where they could be. And then if they are on Instagram, they could check out at Garage Strength. I'm also on Instagram personally. It's at Ghostface D Milla. But then we've got our app is available at peakstrength.app, and that's sort of where our whole system is sort of built off of, or the whole app is built around our training system. And they could just go to garagestrength.com as well and just check out anything we've got there too.
Awesome. Thanks again for taking the time to jump on. Really, really
Yeah,
enjoyed
thanks
it.
for having me on. I had fun. Hopefully I
Yeah,
didn't
no,
blab too much.
no, really, really good. So yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on, Dane. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.
Peace.